Crash dive. Let me see if I can still remember the proper sequence of events, which in some small way may have contributed to Mr. Muldoon's peculiar behavior that wonderful, glorious summer after third grade. First, I had narrowly escaped drowning in the diving bell crazy Eddie Muldoon and I had built out of an old milk pail, a hose, and a tire pump. Some kind of technical problem, as I recall. Next, the bush plane we built on top of the Muldoon barn crashed on takeoff. Eddie was pilot and I co-pilot. Eddie claimed the crash was a result of wind shear or some such thing. I thought it was pilot error, but never expressed my opinion to Eddie, nor to the board of inquiry that investigated the crash. What in the name of heaven were you two? Then we dug the pit trap for capturing wild animals in the Muldoon pasture. All we managed to capture, however, were a small but nervous skunk and Mr. Muldoon, unfortunately both of them at the same time. We had tried to explain to Eddie's father how lucky it was that he had landed in the trap with a mere skunk, rather than, say, a mountain lion, which was what we had hoped to catch. A mountain lion could have torn him to bits, whereas the skunk smell wore off him in less than a year. It is difficult, however, to get a grown-up to pay attention to two 8-year-old boys, no matter how sensible they may be, and Mr. Muldoon was no exception. It was during the course of the above-mentioned ventures that I observed Mr. Muldoon's behavior becoming increasingly strange and unpredictable. For example, Eddie and I would be doing nothing more than pulling a little wagon load of boards across the yard, when Mr. Muldoon would pop out of the barn and yell something irrational at us, like, "Stay out of my workshop! Don't touch my tools! Don't build nothing!" To me, he seemed to be getting weirder and weirder with each passing day. I didn't mention this to Eddie, however, because I didn't want to distract him from our top-secret project, the design and construction of a submarine. The work on the submarine was top secret because, Eddie said, he wanted to surprise his parents. That was one of the nice things about Eddie. He was always thinking up new ways to surprise his parents. That may be why both his mother and father went about with constant surprised looks. It was sort of eerie, actually. Eddie's parents were beginning to make me uneasy with all their twitches and jerks, surprised looks, and irrational shouting. Eddie and I worked on a submarine every chance we got. As soon as his father had gone off on his tractor to plow a field or something, we would rush into his workshop and grab armfuls of tools and haul them off to the building site. Eddie explained to me that when his father said, "Don't touch my tools," he didn't really mean, "Don't touch my tools," but something else. "What else?" I asked. "I'm not sure," Eddie said, selecting a saw and testing it for sharpness with his thumb. "Just something else." "Why do you ask?" "No reason. You think we'll need a brace and bit today?" "Yes, and fill your pockets with those big nails. We'll need lots of nails." Much of our time was spent scouring the countryside for submarine building materials, which were fairly scarce in North Idaho. Nevertheless, we salvaged numerous boards from an old shed Mr. Muldoon probably was planning on tearing down anyway. We also had the good fortune to find an old wooden barrel, an abandoned hog trough, a wash tub, several lengths of stovepipe, some metal roofing, a hose, a tire pump, a truck inner tube, and various other essentials of submarine construction. Slowly the sub took shape. The long, sleek hull contained hatches fore and aft for quick departures from the deck prior to crash dives. A 4-inch swivel gun was mounted just ahead of the forward hatch. The conning tower jutted magnificently up from the deck, its sides painted with the name of our deadly underwater craft, Seawolf. The very name sent chills up and down our spines. Eddie designed and manufactured the periscope himself. In many ways, it was the most impressive part of the submarine. Several small mirrors of the kind mothers and sisters carry in their purses were cleverly mounted inside a tube in such a way that it was possible to run the periscope up from the conning tower, peer into the lower opening, and see an eye staring back. The first time I looked through the periscope, I shouted at Eddie, "Crash dive! Crash dive! There's an eye bearing down on us at 20 knots!" Eddie was not amused, and I narrowly escaped court-martial. We made several trial runs with the sub, and everything worked perfectly. It slithered silently as a shark's ghost beneath the unsuspecting enemy, entered and left harbors of the world undetected, and scouted the far reaches of the Pacific and Atlantic. Satisfied with its performance, Captain Crazy Eddie Muldoon decided that at last the time had come to subject our submarine to the ultimate test, putting it in actual water. With the foresight of any good engineer, Eddie had built the submarine on top of 2 round fence posts. Eddie stationed himself in the conning tower during the launch so that he could direct the crew in the proper method of pushing the submarine into water. The crew put its shoulder to the stern of the sub, pushed, and the vessel slid into the waves, to the resounding applause and cheers of the captain and crew. The crew then leaped aboard, almost ejecting the captain from the conning tower, and once again narrowly escaping a court-martial. The sub soon righted itself. Scarcely had it done so, however, than the crew detected what it supposed to be a serious flaw in the craft. "It's sinking!" the crew yelled. "It's sinking!" "It's supposed to sink, you fool!" the captain snarled at the crew. "It's a submarine!" Not being stupid, the crew chose that moment to mutiny and leap back toward shore, sinking over its sneakers into black muck. The Seawolf drifted aimlessly about, its deck spouting fountains of water from every orifice, of which there were a good many. The captain, however, showed no signs of abandoning the conning tower. Indeed, his attitude reflected nothing less than sublime confidence. He gripped the conning tower rail and stared down at the deck of the craft, settling into the murky waves beneath him. "Go get my folks," he ordered the crew presently. "I want them to see this. It'll be a big surprise for them." The crew, not at all sure the captain hadn't gone totally mad, raced across the field, over a fence, through the barnyard, over the lawn, and burst into the kitchen, where Mr. and Mrs. Muldoon were just sitting down for an afternoon coffee break. "Quick!" the crew shouted. "The sub's about to crash dive!" Mr. Muldoon had just taken a bite of cinnamon toast, a piece of which protruded from his trembling lips. The entire left side of his face convulsed in a gigantic twitch. As I say, the man was strange. "Sub," he said. "What's a sub?" "Crash dive," Mrs. Muldoon said. "What's a crash dive?" "Submarine!" roared Mr. Muldoon. "Submarine!" He leaned forward, grabbed the suspenders of the crew's overalls, and jerked them up to within an inch of his face. Where? The creek? The lake? Where?" He scared the crew so badly for a moment it couldn't remember where the submarine was crash diving. Besides that, he had sprayed cinnamon toast crumbs in the crew's eyes. Finally, the crew was able to blurt out, The duck pond!" Mr. and Mrs. Muldoon fairly exploded out the door and raced each other across the lawn, through the barnyard, over the fence, and across the pasture. "Cripes," the crew said to itself. "You'd think they'd never seen a submarine crash dive before." Not wishing to be left out of the surprise, however, the crew sped after the Muldoons and arrived at the duck pond mere seconds behind them. They slid to a stop and stood wheezing and gasping at the pond's edge, staring out at what no doubt to them appeared to be nothing more than an old wooden barrel protruding from the water. From the interior of the conning tower, for that in fact was the true nature of the barrel, came an ominous sound. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. "Eddie!" screamed Mrs. Muldoon. Crazy Eddie's head popped up out of the barrel. "Hi, Ma, Pa! What do you think of the submarine?" Mr. Muldoon flopped down on his seat and stared out at his son, the captain of the Seawolf. "What in heck are you doing out there?" he croaked, swabbing the sweat from his face with a grungy old bandana. "Well, after my cowardly crew mutinied, I crash-dived to the bottom. Now I'm surfacing again." "Surfacing," Mr. Muldoon said, studying the sleek hull beneath the lapping waves. "Good luck!" "Thank you, sir," the captain said, and disappeared back into the barrel. Oosh, 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 oosh. We then observed one of the great miracles of modern technology. Slowly, wobbly but steadily, the submarine began to rise to the surface. Eddie's calculations had proved correct. It was indeed possible for him to inflate with a hand pump the truck inner tube installed directly below the conning tower. Mr. and Mrs. Muldoon were wonderfully surprised and even cheered and applauded this display of well-known American ingenuity. As they strolled limply back toward their house, Mr. Muldoon suddenly stopped, appeared to think for a moment, then spun around. "Tire pump!" he shouted. "What's my tire pump doing out in the middle of a duck pond? Where'd you get the inner tube? My tools!" Later that summer, the Muldoons moved away, and I never again saw Crazy Eddie, the pal with whom I had first skinned my knees, blackened my eyes, bloodied my nose, and broken my bones, the ties that truly bind. My mother, grandmother, and I went over to bid the Muldoons goodbye. Crazy Eddie stood straight and fairly tall on the back of the old flatbed truck that was loaded down with all the Muldoon furniture. As the truck pulled out of the yard, he threw me a jaunty salute, turned, stared straight ahead, and never looked back. I sadly watched my friend vanish into a future we would not share. The heavy silence broken only by the sounds of Mom and Gram leaping into the air and clicking their heels.